At midnight, when the rain tapped softly on the round windows of Bellwether Library, Milo began his favorite job. He was the smallest assistant the library had ever had, and the only one who could dust beneath a bookshelf without bending down. He straightened a ribbon, polished a brass corner, and opened the last book on his trolley. A painted ship sailed across a blue paper sea. Milo smiled. Then the moonlit water trembled. The ship faded. The waves curled into tiny drops of ink and slid over the edge of the page. Within seconds, both pages were white. Milo blinked. He checked beneath the book. He checked inside his satchel. He even checked behind his own ears, because surprising things sometimes ended up there. Nothing. Then a single black drop rolled across the floor, turned the corner, and vanished. Between the shelves, Milo lifted his brass magnifying glass. "Stories do not simply walk away," he whispered. From somewhere high above came the faint flutter of paper wings. Milo followed the drop into the Hall of Adventures. There he found a dragon book with no dragon, a treasure map with no island, and a book of giants containing only a very small boot in one corner. Whatever was stealing stories was getting faster. On the edge of an empty page, something red had caught on the paper. Milo pinched it carefully. It was not ink. It was a thread, thin as a whisker. The thread crossed the carpet, climbed a shelf, and disappeared over the top. Milo slung his dark red satchel across his chest and began to climb the brass ladder. The higher he went, the smaller the reading lamps looked below him. At the final rung, a gust of wings scattered dust into his face. A pale shape darted behind an atlas. "Stop," Milo called. "Those stories belong to everyone." The atlas snapped shut. The red thread pulled tight and raced away along the shelf. Milo swallowed his fear and followed it into the part of the library where assistants were never supposed to go alone. The thread led through the map room, where paper mountains rose from open atlases and compass roses spun without wind. It slipped beneath the door of the portrait gallery, where painted explorers now pointed accusingly at blank spaces beside them. Everywhere Milo went, he found scraps of missing pictures, a silver fish swimming through the air, half a castle balancing on a lampshade, 3 painted apples rolling up a staircase. He gathered each fragment into his satchel. At the top of the stairs, the fragments began to glow. They tugged toward the attic as if they knew the way home. Milo opened the narrow door. The archive beyond was blue with moonlight. Forgotten books leaned in crooked towers. An old hand press slept beneath a sheet. And across the rafters stretched the red thread, woven into hundreds of tiny loops. Something moved behind the press. Milo raised his magnifying glass. 2 amber eyes looked back. Then 2 enormous ivory wings opened, each marked with a circle of gold. The creature was a paper moth, no larger than half of Milo. She hugged a bundle of painted stars to her soft ivory chest. "Give them back," Milo said, trying to sound taller than he was. The moth shook her head. "If I do, I disappear." Before Milo could ask what she meant, she sprang into the air. Her wings beat once, and every loose page in the archive leapt up with her. Milo chased her between towers of books, ducking beneath maps and jumping over tumbling pencils. The moth flew through a hanging chart of the moon. Milo followed through the paper circle and landed in a drift of blank pages. His satchel burst open. The silver fish, the castle, and the apples escaped in 3 different directions. For one breath, moth and mouse forgot their quarrel. They lunged together, caught the fragments, and crashed gently into the same cushion of paper. The moth almost smiled. Then the gold in her wings flickered, and one edge became transparent. "My name is Vellum," she said. And I am running out of story. Behind the printing press, Vellum had built a nest from endings. A paper crown rested beside a pirate's sunset. A tiny painted door opened onto half a garden. Golden words glimmered across the walls, but none stayed long enough to be read. Vellum explained that she had hatched inside an unfinished book. There had been no title, no adventure, and no final page, only a pale moth sketched in one empty corner. When the book was stored in the attic, the sketch had fluttered free. But every year, the paper grew thinner. When I borrow a picture, she said, I become solid again. For a little while. Milo looked at the empty books below and then at Vellum's fading feet. He wanted to be angry. Instead, he saw that every treasure in the nest belonged to somebody else. Vellum was surrounded by stories and still had none of her own. You cannot keep them, Milo said gently. Then I will be nothing, Vellum answered. Before Milo could reply, the old press gave a deep metallic groan. The press had been swallowing every loose drop of ink that crossed the attic floor. Now its rollers began to turn by themselves. Red thread wound around the gears. Blank pages flew into the machine and burst out covered in pieces of different tales. A knight wore a mermaid's tail. A teapot sailed through a desert sky. A giant castle balanced on the back of a silver fish. The pictures were beautiful, impossible, and terrified. They spun faster until a black storm filled the archive. Book towers swayed. Vellum was pulled toward the turning rollers, her paper wings snapping in the wind. Milo wrapped the red thread around a brass handle and braced his bare feet against the floor. He caught Vellum's antenna with both paws, but the thread began to tear. Let the fragments go, he shouted. Vellum looked at the glowing nest she had spent years building. Then she opened her wings. Every stolen star, crown, ship, apple, and golden word rose from the nest and flew into the storm. The press stopped. So did Vellum's light. Vellum lay almost invisible on a clean white page. Only her amber eyes and the faint gold circles on her wings remained. Milo opened the ink bottle beside the press. I cannot return your stolen story, he said, because you never had one. Vellum closed her eyes. So we will make one. Milo dipped a quill into the ink. He drew a small moth rising from an unfinished book. Vellum touched the line with one antenna, and the drawing filled with warm gold. Next, they drew a mouse following a red thread. Then a moonlit archive, a wild ink storm, and two figures holding on to each other. With every new picture, Vellum became solid again, not because she had taken someone else's tale, but because she was finally helping shape her own. Together they sorted the remaining fragments. Ships returned to seas. Dragons flew back to mountains. Apples settled into their proper baskets. Each restored book sent a ribbon of color down through the dark library. By dawn, only one blank book remained. When the great doors opened that morning, Bellwether Library looked exactly as it should. The ship sailed again. The dragon breathed a painted curl of smoke. Every giant had both boots. Almost exactly. High above the reading room, a new little desk stood beside Milo's nest. Vellum sat there with an ink-smudged antenna, carefully repairing a torn illustration. Whenever she returned a fragment, the golden lines in her wings shone brighter. Milo placed their new dark blue book on the lowest display shelf, where even the smallest visitor could reach it. Inside were pictures of a mouse, a moth, and a storm, made from stories. There were no printed words yet. Vellum worried that this meant their work was unfinished. Milo turned to the final page. It was completely white. Did we miss one? Vellum asked. Milo shook his head. That page is not empty. It is waiting. Outside, the rain stopped. A child entered the library, opened the blue book, and found a small red thread tucked between its pages. Above the shelves, Milo and Vellum exchanged a smile. Somewhere, a new story had just begun.